Well, hello. It is so good to see you. Thank you for joining me for Bible study time. I appreciate it. Today, we are talking about how Israel entered the Promised Land. It has been so long, hasn't it? We have waited and waited. We have spent most of COVID wandering around in the wilderness with Israel, unable to finally enter the Promised Land, and today is the day. So, let's just get right to it. You remember that Israel was camped a little way from the Jordan, and God told Joshua, like I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. And Joshua told the priests to gather everything up, and the Levites to take the tabernacle apart. And the priests came and they picked up the Ark of the Covenant on their poles and they carried it. And the Levites came behind with all the pieces of the tabernacle. And the people packed their stuff up and they struck down their tents and they got everything packed up. And the whole group paraded on toward Canaan. There was just one problem. The Jordan River was flooded. It was at flood stage, and the water was running too fast and too high for the people to cross. So after all of this time and all of these preparations, they got to the edge of the Jordan River, and there was no way to cross it. But they knew. They had learned that God would take care of them. So nobody panicked, nobody complained. They just set up their tents again and they hunkered down to wait for the flood to go down. And the people in Jericho, they looked across and they saw this company of Israel camped across the Jordan River, and they saw the Jordan at flood stage, and they thought, whew, we're safe, at least for the time being. So the people waited. They waited 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and God said to Joshua, it's time. And Joshua sent officers through the camp telling the people, it's time. And so the priests got their stuff together again. They picked up the ark on the poles again. The Levites picked up the pieces of the tabernacle again. The people packed up their tents and got all of their stuff together again. The shepherds got their sheep. The herdsmen got their cattle. Everybody got ready. They walked down to the edge of the Jordan River, and as soon as the priests' feet touched the water stopped flowing. It stood up like a wall on the upriver side of the priests. And the priests walked down into the dry riverbed. The water downstream, of course, ran off. And they stood there, and the wall of water stood quivering, waiting, obeying God. Well, the people thought that was pretty cool. And they walked right across the Jordan River into Canaan. The priests standing there in the middle of the river, the wall of water quivering, the dry bed as an easy place for Israel to cross. They got across the Jordan River, and God said to Joshua, send one man from each tribe back into the river and have him pick up a big stone. We want each tribe to pick up the biggest stone that they can find. And so representatives of the 12 tribes went back into the riverbed where the priests were still standing with the Ark of the Covenant. And they picked up 12 big stones. Then they brought them to the Canaan side, to the Jericho side of the river, and they made a pile of them. And the Lord said, this pile of stones is a testimony for future generations. When your children ask, why is there a big pile of stones here? You remind them of the story about how I brought Israel into Canaan, about how by my power the river stopped flowing. By my power Israel crossed on dry land into the promise that I had for them. Well, that was a cool idea. And the people jumped to it. Representatives from each of the tribe went out, got the big stone, made the big pile, got it all set. And when everything was ready, the priests walked up out of the dry riverbed. And the minute that the back priest's feet was on the grass, that wall of water collapsed and the river went back to flowing. The people were so amazed. They praised God, and then they looked around them at their new home. This place that they'd been hearing about and waiting for more than 40 years, for their whole lives, many of them. They'd heard of this place. And it was a rich land. It was a beautiful land. Grass and fields and orchards. It was a wondrous place to which God had brought them. And so they began to gather food from the fields. People who'd been born in the wilderness, they had never tasted grain before. They had never tasted fruit before. It was amazing to them. And they celebrated how God had provided for them, how God had brought them to this wonderful place. They ate until their tummies were stretched. There's one more thing to know. You know how God had fed the people every day, except Sabbath, with manna from heaven? God was faithful to the people when they were in need, but now that God brought them into Canaan, it never came again. Manna has never fallen since that day. God had a plan for his people. God provided for his people. And when there was provision for them, when they didn't need the manna from heaven, it stopped. It's a good thing for us to remember, all of it, this whole story, that God can do anything, that God has a plan for our lives, that what God intends for your life is good and wondrous, and that God will take care of you in times of need, and God will provide for you and for your family ongoingly. So now the people in Jericho are panicky. Israel is well fed and relaxing on the Canaan side of the Jordan River, and they're wondering, what do we do next? How is God going to give us this land, and what are we going to do about that big walled city over there? Well, that's a story for another day. But we've reached the promised land, and God, who has kept every promise, is certainly going to keep the rest of them. We'll find out exactly how as we keep telling these stories. In the meantime, you take care, you work hard in school, obey your parents, work on being a good man or a good woman, and I am delighted that we have this time together. See you next week. Bye-bye.